Hello everyone and welcome. This is going to be an update to my HO layout representing the Burlington from Chicago to Burlington, Iowa. I call it the CBQ Chicago Division, although in real life it's really called the Mendota subdivision. This is going to be outlining the initial concepts and the current progress as it stands to today. I had a layout in the 2000s which represented the Burlington around Galesburg, Illinois, but decided to this incarnation have the railroad extend from Chicago to Burlington, Iowa, focusing a lot on passenger operations. There's a lot of operators in our region, but not a lot of folks focus on the passenger side, maneuvering cars to into the commissary and RPO cars and baggage cars moved around and switch between trains and so on. So what I did is I had taken those concepts, kept a notepad of various towns that I had visited in person, things I'd seen in photographs and read places, and just started keeping a note of things that I wanted to try to represent in each of the towns on the layout. Did things like simple sketches, and then of course would sketch out things like how I want bench work design to look, how I want to design the backdrop and the curves and so on. And so you see just a sampling here of some of the pages out of my notebook. Some of the concepts I developed was that I wanted the benchwork height to be somewhere between 48 and 53 inches high. I wanted a minimum of 36-inch aisleways, no duck unders. A main line worked out to be somewhere around 155 feet, although currently there's about 90 in place. The Illinois Central Milwaukee portion of the layout is going to be about 75 feet, and the New York Central is going to run about 35 feet. So the original drawing and benchwork concept was put together by Dick Schultz and I. He actually has designed the footprint for the layout. He had done a bunch of sketchings and came back with a footprint plan that I utilized, although the location of the towns and some of those kinds of things have changed from the original plan. Here you see the sketch that Dick put together. When you first enter the layout space, the room is approximately 22 by 25 feet. There's about 550 square foot devoted to the layout. It represents Chicago to Burlington, Iowa, as mentioned before. A lot of interchange to take place in these areas. Chicago has the Union Station, which hosts trains from the Gulf of Mobile, Ohio, the Pennsylvania, and then the Burlington and its roads that it handled their passenger trains for the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern. And then it also has the town of Mendota, Illinois, which has interchange with the Milwaukee Road and the Illinois Central. It has Zering, Illinois, which represents interchange with the New York Central's easternmost terminus. And then Burlington, Iowa, which is the westernmost terminus on my layout, and that represents interchange with the Rock Island, and then lines to the K line and so on, which we'll get into a little bit later on in the presentation. Moving over to the right just a little bit, you can see the storage area for the New York Central, the Milwaukee and Illinois Central trains. They kind of come down the hill and go to a reverse loop, which is underneath of the area that will eventually be Burlington, Iowa. This territory has been wired and just waiting the installation of switch machines, and then we'll be able to cover this up and finish the bench work for the Burlington section of the layout. So here's a map representing the area that I'm modeling. The red is the CB&Q. You can see where it starts kind of in the top center with Chicago Union Station. It drops south, goes under Harrison Street, goes past the Zephyr Pit and so on. This is a little more recent map, so they talk about Amtrak's 14th Street Yard and so on. But the Pensy had their coach yards and so on the east side of all the tracks out of Union Station south end, and the Q had all of their stuff on the west side. Then down toward the south end, the Q made a big swing to the west, and so you can see that occurring by following that orange line off to the lower left. And then straight south was the GM&O and the Pennsylvania. They continued south and east, and I represent the Y there where that number 29 is, where we can turn trains from all the railroads that went into the south end of Union Station. So what I'm hoping to do with a bunch of these images is to show you a shot of the location, and then I will, in the next shot, show you what I've attempted to model emulating that location. Obviously, we have to do selective compression. I'm only dealing with a fair amount of square footage, but not enough to model anything on a 1/87th actual scale. But here's an example of the road. That's as the trains come out from the South End Union Station. You can see a little bit of the Railway Express Agency building. And then in the model format, same thing with downtown Chicago, and then the curved bridge going over the top of the Railway Express tracks, shown by the MP cars and the Q car below. So here's a morning shot of a train coming out from all of the tracks that enter into Union Station. The station waiting room and so on was about 2 to 3 blocks back from this site. The trains rode rails underneath of the city buildings for several blocks, and on the model I'm emulating this by having the trains go through the station, and they actually turn once they get inside of the station area, the platform area, and begin to drop down so they can go into storage tracks for staging. What you also see here is a Pennsylvania train that looks like it's just pulling in the center, and then on the right hand side looks to be some Railway Express box cars, and then the Pennsy and I've seen Milwaukee cars and so on in this building to the left, and so I'll emulate operations by moving express cars and so on from a lot of different railroads in and out of this left hand side. So then my version with some mock-up buildings is showing again a train coming out. I don't know if this is the Kansas City Zephyr or what it's going to emulate. You can see there's a Pennsy car parked in the building to the left, which again is just strictly a mock-up. And then the Pennsy trains going in, and then the express box cars on the right-hand side. On my layout, I've chosen specifically not to have double slips. I know they look cool. I wasn't necessarily worried about price, but I was worried about operation. I feel like double slips, particularly a bunch of them in a row, would be nothing but a headache for a reliable operation. And my motto is they have to work. That means much more to me than being absolutely prototypically correct. I need to have absolutely foolproof operation and continuous running. So here's a GM&O train that's just left Union Station. This could be the Abraham Lincoln. You can see Roosevelt Road in the background, and then off to the left-hand side is a lot of the freight house area for the Burlington. Their freight house had both inbound freight and outbound freight on separate tracks. There was a separate warehouse for both. There's a lot of places here where you'll see express agency cars being unloaded. There's also part of the coach yard, and so I've modeled all this in a much smaller setting, but conceptually I'm trying to pick up a lot of the operation. On the right hand side you can see the Pennsy has the beginning of some of their coach yards. I'm modeling a little of that by allowing some tracks for commissary and baggage cars, and then a coach yard to park the rest of the coaches. But when those trains come in, they'll be broken up, stored in their specific coach yards, cars to the commissary, cars to the express buildings and all of that. So here's a similar scene on the layout. You can see that the road in front that has the blocks and the piece of flat plywood is Roosevelt Road, and then the farther back one that's got the bow to it, that's Harrison Street. You can see that I've started laying the track in place for the variety of tracks necessary for the freight house operation. Just the inbound and outbound freight house holds 20 assorted length cars, and then of course there's the coach yards and part of the Zephyr pit for the Burlington on the left hand side. On the right side you can see the Pennsy passenger cars. They're on their own track right there, where a switch engine will maneuver cars around again for the commissary and for coach yards and for making and breaking up the Pennsylvania trains. The Burlington like to use Baldwin VO1000s for their switchers in this region, and here you can see one of them working. The Empire Builder looks like it's probably positioning it to the station area. You can see the Railway Express Agency building in the background, and wanting to show you this to show you how the model format looks. And then here's a quick shot of my representation on the layout. So here's an overview of the Zephyr pit area and the commuter cars being stored between runs. You're actually facing south here, and what I wanted to show is that all the tracks are coming from the station in the lower shot, and then lower part of the shot, I should say, and then they go around, and you can see where the track curves off to the right and goes toward the west, following the curvature of the commuter cars that are sitting there, and then straight down and to the south. You can see that there's the lift bridge over the Chicago River. Part of that will be emulated on the layout, and in my case, where the lift bridge is represented, there is a hole in the wall that goes into storage, which will hold the Pennsy and the GM&O trains and any of the transfers that will come in from those railroads. And I briefly mentioned earlier the lift bridge that carries trains over the Chicago River as they continue on toward the south. In my incarnation of the layout, I'm going to take this exact photo, have it printed, and then where the tracks go through, that's where the hole is through the wall that goes to the storage level on the top level that will hold the Pennsy trains and the trains from the GM&O. And then I'm going to emulate some transfer operations for the CB&Q to go down to the various railroads to the south, and then occasionally a GM&O train will come in. This is a little bit of modeling license, but the GM&O will have a switcher that'll bring some cars up for interchange. Just a couple more shots here, but obviously the Empire Builder getting ready to make the big turn around the, I think it was a 12-degree curve to head toward the west. But again, just the grittiness of Chicago, and you can see the Pennsy cars in the background just help you to get a better idea of what we're trying to fulfill with the scenes. And spinning around, here's a shot of an inbound commuter train negotiating the 12-degree curve up toward Union Station. I'm showing you this because this is down near where the Y will be, where we'll Y all of the passenger trains that come into the Union Station terminal area. And then we'll contrast this, of course, with the model shot. So here in the model form is the California Zephyr turning and heading west past the Union Avenue Tower. You can see on the upper left there's some roadbed laid, and that's going to be the Y for turning all the trains, not only between sessions, but then during the operating session, turning all the active passenger trains that have come in from their points and then spinning around for their destinations to go back out. You can see what we call the Zephyr tracks, or the Zephyr pit area, where the long distance trains will be stored between their runs, not only between operating sessions, but emulating again when the train comes in and is being serviced and then turned to go back out. So then, as a quick overview, here's the throat tracks into Union Station. There is a continuous run option through Union Station, which will allow for open houses or just for fun running to have complete operation in a circle. And then you can see that the Pennsy is sort of in their territory with the Pennsylvania cars on the right, where there will be cars, like I said earlier, for the commissary and so on. And then the Burlington, the switch engine in that Empire Builder car is cutting off and heading over toward the Zephyr pit area. And then, of course, we've talked about several times now the tracks for the inbound and outbound freight terminal, freight housing area, and coach yards. There's obviously a lot of things laying around the layout, including a set of E-units up on the overpass. Not sure why, but apparently I must have been not paying attention when I was doing the photos. Kind of spinning around, here's an aerial view of the curve of the main lines as they head to the west. You can also see where that block of wood is sitting there, the hole in the wall for the Pennsy and the GM&O to go into the storage tracks. And you can see the Y that's sort of obscured by a hammer and a ES-44 and some other boxcar. But that will be the Y for turning the passenger trains, and for the GM&O to run their switch engine for making an interchange with the Q over near Union Avenue. Here's a quick look at the upper and lower level staging that's through the wall from the Y. This will hold on the upper level the Broadway Limited and GM&O trains. In addition, it will provide room for the Y operations for all the other passenger trains that have to be turned around There's some lower level staging which is being utilized or will be utilized by the Illinois Central and the Milwaukee for trains that depart out of here and then make an appearance over near Mendota, do their work there, and then continue on to some storage on the other side. We'll see more of that in a little bit. Back out into the main room now, you can just see on the upper left-hand side Union Avenue, the Union Avenue Tower, and that's an area that will be utilized by an operator who will assist with all the turning operations and coordinating the switching for all of the freight house areas near Union Station. Moving around the corner a little bit now, we are seeing what I would kind of call the west end of the passenger storage operation, Union Avenue, and then part of the industrial area that you can see the GM&O Elko sitting over there. We'll maneuver some cars around there and make an interchange with the Q. Here's an actual overhead shot of the area that we're talking about. Over where the letters E and F are is the coach yards for the commuter trains as they're being stored. The letter B is where Union Avenue Tower used to be. This is a more recent shot, but this is just to give you, again, conceptually what I'm trying to emulate in the previous photos. Here's the tower itself. Was built sometime in the early 20s. This is certainly a very old image here with the passenger train coming toward us. Looks like it's steam powered. May have some troop cars on there that have been converted to baggage cars, but it looks like some kind of a mail train that's heading west. A pretty old automobile parked next to the tower itself. And here's my version of a similar area. Funny story about this tower. It was scratch built by Dick Schultz for a previous layout I had. It was representing Seminary Street Tower in Galesburg, which had a very similar feel to the tower in Chicago. So we're going to utilize that in its second home here to control the movements of the passenger trains in and out of Union Station. So on the layout, I have drawn out diagrams from the operator's perspective to hopefully aid the operators to maneuver trains a little bit simpler around the layout. I know looking at this seems very complex, but all of the switches on the layout are controlled by switch-its and switch-8s that have an assigned number to each switch or crossover. You can see those in the parentheses. For example, it might be parentheses 20 or parentheses 23 or whatever. And then in addition to that, I created a bunch of macros. And so if you take something like on the lower left-hand side where it says CB&Q passenger, which is number 2, and let's say you wanted that train to go to C. So if you look up C2 on the matrix, you can see that C2 says macro 43, and when you push macro 43 in on your controller, it'll line all those turnouts automatically. Or something more complex, like let's say you're up at the top left-hand side and you can see where it says GM&O or letter J, and you want to go from J all the way down to the lower right to number 6 to line all those turnovers through the crossovers, or let's say J to C, because you're just going to do a maneuver for Y-ing a train. If you look down to CJ or JC, that's number 47. So again, if you push macro 47, it'll line all the turnouts. Number 17, number 18, number 19, number 21 will all be aligned for that operation. So hopefully the multiplexing of these turnouts will aid in operation for the individual operators for these territories. So there's a couple of places on the layout that as we progress around the railroad, there's going to be some opportunities for some overpasses, and I really liked this overpass. It looked like it was somewhere over near Cicero, although I'm not exactly sure, but I like the idea of this overpass painted with the logos and having the Everywhere West saying on the side of it. So we're going to model this somewhere in the vicinity of Union Avenue. Moving a little further down the line, I've always enjoyed the depot at Highlands, Illinois. It still stands to this day. It's a stone waiting room for commuter trains, but I will represent this on the layout a little bit more toward what I'll call the Naperville curve. This is a neat shot of the 5632, which is one of their excursion engines of the 1960s that is working west past the Highland station. Speaking of the Naperville curve, Kim's from Naperville originally, and so I can't have a layout representing Chicago without having at least a small portion of Naperville. Here's a 4-unit set of Fs westbound on the triple track, the racetrack as it's called, working its way towards Naperville itself. Again, on the layout, we'll have a scene similar to this with the overhead, and like I mentioned earlier, about where this guy's middle of the train is or so, on the layout we'll also have the Highland Tower. I'm sorry, the Highland Depot. Here's a quick shot of my Naperville curve, the version on the railroad. It's interesting to me to see how the curvature looks really compressed in these shots. I don't know if it's just because there was a little bit of a zoom to them, but those curves look like they're 18 radius, and they're actually probably about 30, 32, and 34 or so. Here's a really cool shot of the Galesburg Local, which was a train that ran mostly in the summertime. There's an E5 on here, and then 2 heavyweight coaches. That was not unusual. This shot was taken in '65. One of the things I really like about this shot is this was the transitionary era when a lot of the Q's signals and signal bridges went from being painted mineral red to being painted silver. And so it wasn't unusual to mix and match colors, and so I'll do the same thing with signal bridges and trackside signals varying, sometimes mineral red or sometimes silver. So here's another overview map. You can see where the Q has come out of Chicago on the right-hand side. You're following the red now. We've gone along and talked a little bit about Naperville. We're going to get through Aurora and work our way now down towards Mendota, which is on the lower left-hand spot in the photo. You can see that there's an orange line going north and south, and that's the Milwaukee Road, and that goes down to Ladd, and it crosses the Burlington, and it crosses the Illinois Central in Mendota. The IC is coming in the green on the lower left-hand side and continues on through. So let's talk a little bit about Mendota. Here's a neat shot of the Fast Mail. This was an eastbound train going past the very unusual coaling tower in Mendota. This is a very near MS Tower, probably taken from MS Tower. The coaling tower survived at least until the mid-1960s, so I'm going to probably represent it in some form on the layout. The water tank on the left-hand side was there up until probably sometime in the mid-90s, early 2000s. I have photographs of it painted silver in Mendota. This is really an early shot, but I like this really neat image of the coaling tower at Mendota, and then you can see MS Tower there on the right-hand side in the background. Here's a shot of the S-curves in Mendota, and I mentioned earlier about the mineral red signal bridges that later became silver, and so here's an example of one of the silver bridges. Just a very quick image of the station in downtown Mendota. It was a Union station. On one side it was served by the Burlington, and on the other side it was served by the Illinois Central and Milwaukee, so the station was between the two railroads. So here's a diagram of Mendota. You can see that the Q comes in from the upper left-hand side, crosses the Illinois Central and Milwaukee, and then continues to Chicago on kind of the lower right, where the IC and the Milwaukee bisect the page right to left. But because my layout views the world from the north side, I flipped the image over here, and you can see that the Q comes in on the top left and goes to the lower right. The IC Milwaukee come across, and then the Milwaukee has a yard on the right-hand side. And if you take this shot and then we look at the overhead, this is how the shot converts to HO scale on my layout. So you can see that the 2 F units of the Burlington are just getting ready to cross over the diamonds. In the front where the Illinois Central boxcar is the IC Freight House, You can see on the right there's some Milwaukee boxcars. That shows you the Milwaukee yard in Mendota, and then there's a set of IC Jeeps sitting by the depot platform ready to cross the tracks. Obviously the platform is just sitting there as a stand-in. There'll be a scratch build depot that'll go between the two sets of tracks. You can see IC Tower, which was the name of the tower in Mendota. It was a kit bash by Dick Schultz out of a Walthers kit he built for me a few years ago when I had a model of Mendota on my other layout. So we're standing on the CB&Q tracks in Mendota. You can obviously see IC Tower there. The Milwaukee and Illinois Central are crossing us here, and just to the left of the photo you can just barely see a part of the depot there. On the layout, this will be the similar scene to the previous one. You can see the scratch build, or I should say kit bashed IC Tower. Here's just a little bit different angle of the IC Tower with the Burlington 4960 excursion engine going across the Milwaukee and the Illinois Central. You can see the Illinois Central Freight House just on the left-hand side of the photo, kind of above that white structure, and then you can see part of the Railway Express building, and then the Mendota Depot is sort of behind where the man is standing in sort of the green coat. And the backside of IC Tower with the California Zephyr with some Southern Pacific run-through cars working its way westbound towards Galesburg and beyond. And a similar scene in the model form. I just didn't dig out any Southern Pacific cars, but you can see the Milwaukee's yard in the background, and you can of course see the Burlingtons crossing over the IC Milwaukee. The interchange track between two railroads is on the left-hand side, on the far side of the tower. You can see that the backdrop has not been completed at this point. It's curving around and working its way down towards the area around Burlington, but that isn't complete yet. Here's a shot of the Illinois Central going past IC Tower on their own line and in model format. And as a final nod to Mendota, here's a guy in a CB&Q way car picking up orders, and what I hope to be a similar scene in the model form. So here's another view of a map. Now, really from this point forward, from Mendota on towards Burlington for me to the end of my line, the layout is not constructed yet. So we've seen Mendota. The next stop would be Zeering, Illinois, and then beyond that it goes to Burlington. Zeering was important to me because, as you can see with the gray line coming up from the south, the New York Central had one of their most eastern points was an interchange with the Burlington at Zeering, and so there'll be a set of New York Central FAs that will bring up interchange cars to the queue and vice versa. There's a track allotted for this operation, and as I mentioned earlier, the New York Central only runs about 35 total feet on this layout. It leaves Zeering, there's a Y there, and then it continues down the hill essentially to storage tracks down toward Ladd. Here's just a quick view of Zeering. The Burlington is running left to right through the scene, and then north of there the queue went up to Walnut, and then to the south the New York Central went down towards Streeter, and so this is the dash lines represent the New York Central, and on the model form this will be an area approximately let's just say around 12 inches wide and run about 12 feet long or so, just enough to allow for interchange cars and the FAs to run around their train and caboose and then head back toward the east. Here's a quick look of the California Zephyr eastbound to Chicago. To the left of that train you can see there's 3 tracks, and those are the interchange tracks for the New York Central. This is in the little town of Zeering, which is just a little tiny town that you blink your eyes and you'd miss it. So here we are on the map. You can see on the upper right hand side the queue coming down with the red through Zeering, and then continues along through Buda, and then down through Galesburg, and then working our way over towards Burlington. And at Burlington, this gave me an opportunity for some interchange with the Rock Island. The Zephyr Rocket was a train that ran between Manly, well, actually from the Twin Cities down to St. Louis via Manly, Iowa, through Cedar Rapids actually for the local people, and passed within about a half mile of my house, but my house didn't exist when the Zephyr Rocket did. In fact, I didn't exist when the Zephyr Rocket did. But so the next thing we'll talk about then is modeling Burlington. So Burlington was kind of cool because not only did you have the east-west line of the Q, but there was the line that ran what they called the K line out of Burlington, ran south through Fort Madison and down toward Hannibal and so on. And the IC, I don't mean the IC, I mean the Rock Island, came down from the north as mentioned earlier, and they had a really neat operation in Burlington where they had to do a bunch of switching back and forth, basically switchbacks to go from their main line over to the Burlington's main line. The other thing that was neat about their operation of the Zephyr Rocket is that there was an agreement that the RPO cars could not run all the way through from St. Louis up to Minneapolis. And so in Burlington, the RPO cars were changed, which meant that all the mail had to be moved from one car to the other car. It was a different crew. It was just a matter of the crew districts, which was kind of a neat thing to have an operation, an operating concept also for the layout. In addition to that, the dining cars did not go all the way through either. They pulled the diner in Burlington, and then it would sit there until if say the northbound train, it was pulled, and when the southbound train came a few hours later, it was put onto that train. So operators in Burlington, when the Zephyr Rocket comes in, will not only have to switch RPO cars, but they'll also have to pull the diner off, and sometimes they had to pull a coach off. So it'll be that'll give you a little fun passenger operation there. In addition to Rock Island Local, that'll do some switching in Burlington, and then there'll be a train that will leave that will emulate a switcher and a few cars that's going up to Washington, Iowa, where they cut off there at Mediapolis. And then there'll also be just a small little operation of the train that's going to cut off and go down to Carthage. That's kind of a tip of my hat to Dick Schultz's layout, where he has the Carthage turn that comes out of Quincy. We're going to have a Carthage turn that comes out of Burlington. So to me, there's sort of two key structures in the Burlington area. One, of course, is the bridge over the Mississippi River, and the second being the Burlington Depot itself. Here's another angle of the Burlington Bridge over the Mississippi River with the Nebraska Zephyr going west across the bridge. This will be modeled in HO, obviously, but a much foreshortened bridge, and I'm not building it quite to the detail of this structure. So the only thing in Burlington that's been built so far is the bridge over the river, and it's going to be modeled utilizing the swing bridge from Walthers and then two of the Walthers through truss bridges. That gives me a bridge that's just about 4.5 feet long, which is more than enough for my layout space to give you a feel of going over the river. So this is just in progress here. There was a small roundhouse in Burlington with a turntable, and so we'll emulate this scene a little bit on the layout. This area of Burlington has been drawn out on a 1-to-1 HO scale on sheets of plywood ready to be put in place, but because the lower level staging has just gone in, this part of the layout is not completed yet. Here's an overview of Burlington. You can see on the sort of upper left center the track coming off of the river, then makes a curve around. As the track is making the curve, there's the K line down to St. Louis that you really can't see in the photo, but the yard here is visible, and then the Rock Island had some interchange into this yard, which would have come sort of from the center left of the photo. We'll emulate this in model format. It's not really that large of a yard, and it works out perfectly on the pieces of plywood I've drawn it on so far, with the S curves coming off of the river bridge, going through the depot, and then making an S curve off to the right. And then you can see the depot here in the scene, and I wanted to show you this because Dick Schultz had volunteered to build me a fantastic model of the Burlington Depot. So just as a quick reminder of the depot and depot area, you can see just to the left center of the shot was a track that almost always had the RPO car in it from St. Louis, and then it was switched out with a car that came out of Minneapolis, so that will be emulated on the layout. And then just looking at the model of the building itself. And here's the model that Dick Schultz has built in HO scale. It's not quite to scale by design. I had him foreshorten it so it's about 2/3 of the original length, although the width is just about to scale. Here's the trackside view of the building. It's just a little bit over, just about 3.5 feet long or so. Another quick shot of the depot in Burlington with the Exarban Zephyr on the right-hand side. It was the Nebraska Zephyr as it went west to Lincoln, and the Exarban Zephyr as it went east back to Chicago. Set of GP20s on the other main line, the westbound main. There's an old postcard of the Bartlett Fraser Company elevator, and you can see the original depot in the background, but this model of the elevator will be in place in my layout because it lasted until at least the Burlington Northern era and then came down one night because of a fire. Here's a photo of the 5632 on an excursion run just leaving the Burlington Depot as it makes a sweep to the left and then up West Burlington Hill. The area around here was a lot of taller, older structures that created kind of a canyon of buildings that's going to work out perfectly on the layout. This will be the last scene on the layout as the tracks make a left-hand turn and then go into a pretty vast amount of storage tracks for my representation of the west end of the world. And a quick shot of the Rock Island Freight House and an elevator there in Burlington. You can see the Mississippi River on the right, obviously, but this will be the last prototype shot for this tour, and then I'll show you a few more shots of the layout. So I just want to talk for a couple of seconds about some of the standards for the layout. The minimum radius of the main line is 26. I know that's tight, but again, we're only dealing with a 22 by 25 foot space or so. I like Switchmaster switch machines. I find them to be really flexible. I like their slow speed. I'm running all of them with switch-its or switch-8s. The layout does use NCE system. There is 3 boosters that each have 5 amp capability for each of the districts with room for expansion for a 4th one. The meters on the right hand side are showing the amperage usage out of the power supplies. And I think I mentioned earlier that the switch motors are run off of switch-its and switch-8s. These have the opportunity to not only allow you to use the DCC system to throw the turnouts, but of course you can wire in panels with push buttons or toggles if you'd like, and depending on how the operators do during trial runs with utilizing the controllers for throwing turnouts, we may end up having to put in some panels or something to ease that operation for people. I just wanted to show a quick example of the car cards in the layout. I'm choosing car cards over switch lists because I like the fact that operators can correct errors. If trains and cars are put into the wrong place, the operators discover it and they can resolve it. And I'm not really keen on updating a computer between sessions. But nonetheless, they both work fine, but I'm just choosing this option. This is a car card printout that was developed by Chris Schilb out of Davenport, Iowa. And basically, this particular card shows obviously the 2, in this case is the freight terminal outbound side in Chicago on track number 1, and the routing is via the queue. So of course, if you are working the IC in Mendota, this at least gives you an idea where it should go, and then all of the destinations are color coded, and so if you have a handful of cards and they all have the orange slot across them, in this case you'll know you have the right cars going to the right spot. And that brings us up to date. Here's some information on how you can get a hold of me. You can certainly email. I'm on Facebook under CBQ Chicago Division HO Model Railroad, and my website is modelrailroaddreams.com. Feel free to send a note. I welcome visitors. Just need a little bit of warning to make sure that I'm going to be home during the time you're in the region. But come by any time and see it. You want to come over and run trains or run some of your own trains, that's always fine with me. Thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity to give this presentation.